Elastic Security empowers security teams everywhere to prevent, detect, and respond to threats quickly through a unified solution. And it's free and open, putting you in control. Use Elastic Security to eliminate blind spots by analyzing all of your data, no matter its volume, format, or age. Stop threats at scale with automated threat and anomaly detection, and arm every analyst with fast search and integrated case management. Download or try Elastic SIEM for free and experience the benefits of an open security solution backed by world-class security research at securityweekly.com/elastic. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. As always, we're looking for high-quality guest suggestions for all of our podcasts to fill up some upcoming slots in the schedule. You can go to securityweekly.com/guests and complete the form and make your suggestions. We review those monthly and we'll reach out to you once they have been reviewed. Learn how to keep your internet safe in our next webcast with Rapid7 on August 13th. The Internet Exposed, findings from the National Internet Cloud Exposure Report. That's right. You can go visit securityweekly.com/webcast to register for all of our upcoming webcasts and virtual trainings and get the archive on securityweekly.com/on-demand. In the news this week, I say we start with Twitter.
Yeah.
That was hacked.
I was going to say, do you want to start with it or end with it?
I think we start. Let's delve right into the juiciness with Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah.
My take on this, from everything I've read, and again, I haven't done extensive research, or reached out to people for interviews or insider information. I've just been a kind of a silent observer on the Twitter thing. My observation is that OPSEC, especially for your high-privileged users, is very crucial. And the story basically reads, publicly available blockchain records show the apparent scammers received $100,000 worth of cryptocurrency by basically compromising Twitter accounts through what appears to be an internal kind of Twitter administration console. Jack Dorsey says they are diagnosing the problem and pledge to share everything we can when we have a more complete understanding of what happened. My guess is that these high-privileged admins were targeted, that two-factor authentication, either for those internal Twitter administrators, certainly for if you had two-factor authentication in a Twitter account, that didn't matter. They were basically in the back end of Twitter, so that wasn't the issue, and that these internal Twitter users were basically owned via a very highly targeted attack, that the goal was to contribute to make donations to a Bitcoin account, and they made off with, I don't know, some estimates are somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 in Bitcoin, which, hopefully that was worth it for the attackers, or not. I'm not sure.
So the link that I put up, and I'm not saying he's right, but I put up Krebs' take on the attack because it was what I found that actually had a little bit more detail. Again,
Krebs is a very reputable source, Jeff. No one's going to knock you for that. Yeah.
And he was sort of making it sound like it was not so much a technical attack, but it was a phishing attack. It was a social engineering attack against these particular admins that have the right kind of privileges. Who knows whether that's true or not. What I think is interesting is if that's somewhat true, it wasn't so much a technical attack as it was attacking people and processes, which we don't talk enough about in our industry, I don't believe.
Well, I agree. And Graham Cooley, again, a source that I trust very much, I think Graham's theory is interesting, and they're like, one of the questions people have is like, why not Donald Trump's account? Why wasn't that compromised in asking for Bitcoin donations? I think his theory is credible. He says perhaps Twitter's most famous user, arguably, that Twitter has additional protections in place specifically related to that account, as it was deleted by a rogue employee a few years ago. Maybe that prompted additional protections on that account, or maybe that was too high of a profile account whereby their attack would have been noticed a lot more rapidly and shut down, where they kind of went for, like, not the most popular Twitter users, but not the, like, towards the least popular, but like somewhere in that sweet spot where we could convince people that, yeah, it's probably probable that they might ask for, Bitcoin donations. Maybe not so plausible that, the POTUS wouldn't necessarily ask for that, but these might, and therefore we can, net a couple $100,000. Maybe that pays us for our attack, and we're good to go.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense that you certainly don't want to use the most high-profile target and kind of shoot your wad and make it obvious that
right.
It's there's something going on. They picked people that might have tweeted in the past about Bitcoin, or because their role in the industry and the world. It sounds plausible that they would have Bitcoin. So it does sound plausible that there was some sort of intent that went into choosing the targets, because it sounds like they probably had access to anybody that they could have done it with.
Yeah, I mean, rather than Trump, they chose Kanye. I mean, I love Kanye's early work, by the way. It's just awesome. Say what you will about whatever's happening now and in whatever, but his...
Does that fall into the category of a political discussion? Let's talk about Kanye. It's close.
It is. You're right. It is close. I mean, as an artist, again, his early work is just phenomenal, in my opinion. I think I have stickers on some of my audio gear, in Pelican cases that carry some of my audio gear. That's like bring back the old Kanye, right? Because his early works are awesome.
But we digress.
Anyway,
in your original description, and I'm forgetting the exact phrase you use now. Something like, super account, super privileged accounts, special privileged accounts.
Admin account, yeah.
The admin accounts, not the Twitter accounts themselves. Yeah, I mean, how many of us have been in an organization where there's legitimately multiple layers of privileged user?
Yeah, all of us.
Privileged admin accounts.
Well, I mean, yes, but I think many systems are like, you're the highest privileged user or you're not, right? And
well, that's kind of what I'm getting at.
And but I'm guilty of this too. Like, in our own internal software, right, which many of you are familiar with, I'm like, well, I'm getting an error, and I'm like, I could push out a new release and go through all the hoops to do that, or I can use my high privileges and I can just go modify the database directly and put the record in there I need to eradicate that bug, which is what I did. And
right.
I think this
high
is similar.
Privilege is a euphemism for root.
Yeah, and I think this is the same case, right? Like, rather than pushing out new software releases for people to be able to do things on their own, that there's these super admins that can go do things outside of the normal realms. In other words, I don't need a user's credentials and or two-factor authentication to make changes. If I have this person's account, I can go modify the database directly, and that's a new tweet, right? And that's the privilege that we're talking about that was compromised. If I'm an attacker, absolutely I'm going to use social engineering techniques to get at these people. I'm probably going to go to things like LinkedIn and see, figure out who these people are. I mean, let's be frank. There are people in our industry that are just like, OSINT is... their OSINT skills are unbelievable, right? Some of the people that scare me the most, actually, are the folks that thankfully are on our side, right? On the good side, and not the dark side that are very good at that. But we know there's people on the dark side that are absolutely equally as good, and know that if I target these people, I can affect change in one of the world's most popular social media networks, right? And so in this attack, they made a couple $100,000, like big whoop.
So can we talk about that, because it almost tells me that the Bitcoin scam was such a Mickey Mouse scam compared to what they could have done with that access, that I wonder if it wasn't sort of a dry run of something else.
I agree, John. I think you're right. If you look at the sophistication of that attack, you think that sophistication would have translated into being low and slow, in affecting change slowly to avoid detection, rather than just blatantly coming out and posting tweets in some of those popular accounts and asking for Bitcoin donations, like basically a smash and grab.
5 seconds.
They did a smash and grab rather than like this low and slow kind of thing, right? If you have access to those admin users, if I were to go low and slow, I would affect the advertising component of Twitter that has monetary implications, and slowly just start populating, bank accounts from various, things, and undermining the currency that you can affect in Twitter, rather than, again, this is clearly a smash and grab, right?
So why would somebody do that? I mean, obviously, whoever's smart enough to accomplish the hack is also smart enough to strategize what they're going to do once they're in. So what do you make of the choice to do a smash and grab as opposed to the low and slow that you described?
Maybe the low and slow ran a risk of getting caught, right? You think of an organization like Twitter, maybe they would have detected it. So maybe I'm the sophisticated attacker. I fish these users, they're admin users, and I'm like, the risk of a low and slow might be too great. I can sell this on, the dark web or whatever, get my share, and let someone do a smash and grab. I'm absolved from all of this. I made my money, and I'm out, right? Like, we can't think of it as no longer, I think, 15, 20 years ago, there's the single attacker that, does the research, gains the access, and monetizes it. Today, it's very distributed, right? Someone very well may have identified these people, done some of the research, sold that to someone else, that then gained access to the accounts and then sold it to someone else, right?
Guys, they took Obama. They got Obama and they got Biden, okay? What if on the morning of Election Day, Obama and Biden both tweeted out and said, this election is not legitimate, and I am asking my supporters not to vote and further validate an illegitimate election. And that goes out on election morning.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm a smart attacker, I sell it to the Russians, a couple of weeks before the election. I agree.
Yeah.
because
assuming
whoever,
it wasn't the Russians in the first place.
Whoever wins, it's going to be disputed.
Right.
But if the goal is monetary, right, I sell it to the nation state that wants to pay me the most for that level of access.
Sure, you sell it, and then some end user does something with it, and that's what I'm thinking about right now. Is what, seriously, if that had happened, what would we have done?
I mean, you can further put your tinfoil hat on and be like, well, maybe there was a mole somewhere that was pushing someone to sell this to the group that would do the smash and grab, so they get it out in the open, so that it was fixed, so that someone could use it to influence the election.
I wonder if this is actually tied. Remember that big DDoS that happened a couple weeks ago?
Which one?
I wonder if this isn't tied to it in some way, shape, or form.
Oh,
well, now you have your tinfoil.
Which big DDoS a couple weeks ago?
There was a Cloudflare DDoS that they said they survived. It was like some crazy amount of bandwidth that was used, and it was, for them, it was just kind of a bump in the road. Didn't knock them over. from about 316,000 different IP address. ACK, SYN, and SYNACK floods. It was about 400 to 600 million packets per second for several hours and peaks at 700. That one, right, Scott?
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about.
Late June.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm wondering if the two aren't connected in some way, shape, or form.
Well, faint with the left and hit with the right, right?
Well, I think we can draw on previous data that we have about what happens in these types of situations, and kind of draw an influence and be like, maybe this was pushed in this direction by folks that realize that this needs to be out in the open, and that it's only going to minimize the impact of this type of attack if it's out in the open and someone exploits it for something that's not as impactful as, John, what you were hypothesizing about influencing an election, right?
Or even undermining it's not even influencing it. It's undermining the confidence. It's the same as deepfakes, right? Deepfake doesn't have to, everything doesn't have to be a deepfake. Just if there's the possibility of a deepfake, or if it's a possibility of changing an election, it undermines public trust. And that's the whole goal for people who want to destabilize the system.
Yeah, I mean, we can, and what I love about the show is we can hypothesize about anything that we want, right? And we can hypothesize that things happen for a reason. And when I look at this 17-year-old vulnerability in Microsoft software that affects everything from, I believe, like 2003, like it's a ton of different Windows versions, 2003 to 2019 Windows Server versions. It's basically an RCE in Windows DNS Server that has to do with the SIGRed, which is tied to DNSSEC, a wormable critical vulnerability, CVSS base score of 10.0 in the Windows DNS Server. It runs as elevated system privileges. If it's exploited, an attacker is granted domain administrator rights. Really, my first thought when I saw this is the NSA in Israel's 8200 must be pissed, because I would bet a lot of money that either one or both those organizations knew about this vulnerability and was using it for nation-state interests. And one or two possibilities, right? Either someone else discovered it and released it and burned it and sent it to Microsoft, and NSA and 8200 are just pissed because someone else found it and disclosed it. Or NSA and 8200 noticed that enemy nation states also knew about it, and the only way to level the playing field was to get this disclosed, and either NSA or 8200 or both went to Microsoft and said, yeah, by the way, we know about this. Also, other nation states are using it, so we should probably get this fixed right now. And I'm not saying they went there directly, right, but through other channels to affect that change and make that happen. That's my theory. Again, tinfoil hat on, pure speculation, absolutely no data or evidence to support those theories.
Well,
but fun to discuss.
I like to say I'll take my tinfoil hat in large. At this point, the line between crazy conspiracy theory and accepted wisdom is often 6 months or less.
Right? But like, how did Microsoft not know about this flaw? I mean, there's a lot of theories you can go. I mean, Microsoft being arguably one of the largest software companies on the planet, obviously they're going to have vulnerabilities that evade even their outstanding methods to detect them, right? It's amazing that this particular flaw, maybe they were focused on other areas, maybe they're focused on the kernel and other services that are more popular, and not the kind of DNS subsystems, and in particular this SIGRed that is specific to DNSSEC. Maybe that somehow evaded their code checking, but Microsoft's ability to detect code flaws, whether they lead to vulnerabilities or whether they're just bugs that aren't a security impact, is astonishing given the number of lines of code that exist and are generated every day at Microsoft. The fact that it flew under the radar, maybe we'll know once there's more information about this flaw, once it's published, but I think it's pretty astonishing. This flaw has been in there for 17 years and it's just now coming to light. Again, given it's in a critical service that we know a lot about in DNS. And I've seen an enormous amount of flaws that have been identified, exploited, and remediated over time in DNS. It's astonishing to me.
So one of my thoughts is that, we know this is a CVSS 10 score. It's totally exploitable. How are we going to have people actually respond to it and they say, oh, it's been there for, so long. Who cares? I'll patch it tomorrow.
There is, to that end, Lee, there is a mitigation or a workaround that you can limit DNS requests of a certain size. And that, yes. And that's pretty, in my assessment, fairly easy to implement today, that workaround, short of a patch.
I talked to a domain admin. It took him about 10 minutes to do that.
Yep.
But then when you get, like I said, I was just thinking about it. It's been around a long time, and I haven't been exploited. Why do anything about it? And
have you been exploited though?
No.
Would you detect that? There's a scale, but there's a scale, Lee. Yeah. There's a scale of maturity of organizations that could detect if they were exploited or not, right?
Absolutely, and I'll say my organization is probably at one end of the scale in terms of detection, but let's go to some Joe average business, particularly a small business. Their chances are a lot closer to the zero detection than we are.
You also have to talk about the implications of a patch, right? Like, right. If I patch this, is it going to break stuff? What's the likelihood?
What's the regression testing? What do you want to do to make sure that I'm not going to, wind up having to be on the floor fixing it all day tomorrow?
Well, that's why you always install patches at 5 p.m. on Friday. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
No, don't do that.
Patch production. That way, when you patch development, it really works.
But it's hard from a evaluation perspective to understand. Okay, there's a critical flaw. Microsoft has a patch, and like the point in time when Microsoft releases a patch. Let's talk about this one in particular. Like, no one knows. Microsoft obviously has done some level of testing, right? But outside of Microsoft, no one knows what the real world implications are or impacts of applying that patch. It's only after X number of people start applying that patch do you know if there's going to be any negative consequences of applying that patch. And so it's an interesting conundrum. Like, how do we know what the negative impacts are if people haven't started applying it, and how do they report if they're having negative impacts or not? We only know that when Microsoft retracts the patch or releases a new one because it broke stuff.
Well, I'll say this, for a lot of companies out there, to Lee's question about, why bother patching? It hasn't been a problem yet. A certain compliance standard gives you 30 days, and the clock is ticking.
Yeah, it's not just one.
YG, what compliance standard is that?
That would be NIST.
One.
That would be DOD.
But it could be PCI, it could be your own internal, policies, right, or whatever, right?
Well, I'll tell you, I was just going over this today because I was reading through the documentation for a certain client I have, and I think we talked about this a couple months ago. The whole vagueness of the PCI standard in terms of how soon do you need to patch something? How soon do you need to fix a discovered vulnerability? A critical vulnerability, by definition, is addressed in the PCI standard through the vulnerability management program, which is as soon as you know the patch is available for critical security flaws, you have 30 days to install it. There's no mention of critical level vulnerabilities in either the vulnerability scanning or the penetration testing section, and we've gone over that before. So in this case, it's not a matter of waiting until the next time you run your scan to find out you've got this issue with DNS because all of a sudden you're failing your scans or getting findings of your scans, whether you're scanning tomorrow or a week from now or a month from now. The clock is ticking as of the release of the patch. I would say, too, that, in terms of the impetus to do it, there's things that require you to do it. There's certainly, I think, credence to the argument, well, it hasn't been a problem yet. I think there's a difference between, and I think the CVSS scoring addresses this to some degree, whether a vulnerability is discovered sort of benignly in a lab setting or whether you're discovering some sort of attack or exploits out in the wild and you figure out, oh, it's because they're exploiting this vulnerability. So, whether there's an exploit that exists, whether they're seeing it, weaponized, monetized, however you want to refer to it, I think that's part of the difference in terms of, at least emotionally, how soon you respond to it, whether you have to do it because of compliance standards or not.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you think in terms of a Windows remote code execution vulnerability that, independent of your environment, really the only determining factors are, do I have this service or not, right? Like either I'm running a vulnerable Windows DNS service or I'm not. So if you fall in the camp of I'm running a vulnerable Windows DNS service and the vulnerability that has been discovered is a CVSS score of 10 and is remotely exploitable, that should be, I am patching as soon as possible. Because I
don't know that that's technically an and there, Paul. I think remote code execution is built into the score of 10. Just saying.
Yeah, no, I agree, right? Like, it's definitely a huge part of the equation, right, of determining the score, remotely exploitable. And it's Windows. Right. Which attackers are going to move on because it's more popular, right? I think that has to play. I'm not sure that plays into the CVSS score or not, right? Like that's an interesting kind of variable that because Windows is so widely deployed that a remotely exploitable vulnerability will be weaponized by attackers likely faster than Apache Tomcat or Docker or some other technology, right? Like I think that has to play into it. That as an organization, you need to patch this one, right? And I almost hate to say that, but like you need to just patch this one. When it's Windows, it's remotely exploitable. It's in systems that are ubiquitous across the network. If you have this, you should patch it immediately, like as soon as possible.
Yeah. And I want to disagree with myself briefly. There is within the CVSS. There's a difference between remote code execution. They demonstrated the vulnerability is exploitable by the world. Anybody can do it type of thing. There's a difference between that and they've seen exploits in the wild. It's already happening. Right. I don't know how the scoring works, but there is that distinction to be made.
And to your point, Jeff, to kind of tack onto that, there's also like an authenticated remote code execution versus unauthenticated, right? Which also plays into the likelihood of someone being able to execute that attack, right?
Yep.
And this is certainly unauthenticated, right? I'm not sure if it's configuration dependent. I could be confusing that with another vulnerability that we have. But if you look at the number, basically, of remote code execution vulnerabilities in Windows that are in extremely widely deployed software, they're not all that many when we talk about the hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities that are out there. Like, these are the ones that you just need to patch, essentially, right? Get it done. But on the flip side of that, if you screw something up in DNS, shit will stop working. I can say that from experience, wholeheartedly from experience, is when you mess up DNS, like, stuff will stop working. So if this patch does break something, that's the other, it's almost like we need a score of, like, CVSS is all about the threat and the risk, but what about the scoring of the impact of applying the patch, right? It's almost unique to the organization, right? You don't get
how severe is the patch?
Yeah. How impactful is the patch? The likelihood that a patch may cause more damage than this vulnerability, right?
Well, I would say, go apply the workaround, and then in your non-production environment, if you've got one, try the patch and let it bake for a few days, and then roll it into production.
Right.
To trump the PCI thing, DHS put out a directive at the beginning of 19 that said all federal agencies must patch critical vulnerabilities within 15 days and highs within 30. So they're cranking up the volume for good reason.
Yep.
You got to get it done.
Oh, I think the other one that I found actually pretty fascinating was third-party IoT vulnerabilities. There was an article from Dark Reading about we need a paradigm shift, and basically this centers around a company called, is it called Trek? Yeah, Trek. Kind of not Star Trek, spelled differently, Jeff. TRECK. And this company, I had not heard of this company before. Others in InfoSec probably have. But from their website, they say the Trek TCP IP stack designer and Trek co-founder has more than 20 years of experience and is the leading expert of embedded internet protocols, making a TCP IP stack for embedded systems and or IoT devices. The CVEs are quite a few. One of them is CVE 2020-11896, can be triggered by sending multiple malformed IPv4 packets to a device supporting IPv4 tunneling. It affects any device running Trek, so their TCP IP stack, with a specific configuration. They don't disclose any details from what I found about this specific vulnerability, but it allows a stable remote code execution vulnerability demonstrated on a Digi International device for this particular one. Now there's, I believe, 10 different CVEs that in total are affecting millions of IoT devices. My assessment and what I learned from Mike Poors and Stephen Northcutts of the world when I was learning about TCP/IP in general and the vulnerabilities affecting it is that the RFCs define how you should write code to implement the TCP/IP standard. The RFCs are just that. They're requests for comments. They're suggestions that can be interpreted by humans in multiple different ways. Those interpretations and lack of or poor interpretations of those RFCs can lead to things like poor bounds checking, which is my kind of guess for this particular vulnerability. And they probably should have had a much better code review that would lead to more defensible code to protect against these vulnerabilities. However, in this case, it's led to millions of IoT devices that are essentially vulnerable to a remote code execution vulnerability in the TCP/IP stack. We won't know more until Black Hat when they release some of the details about this. But I thought this was right up against the Microsoft RCE, perhaps one of the more interesting ones. Well, and Twitter too. This was a great week for news, by the way. In any case, we won't know the details till Black Hat. And I'm not sure what the patch looks like because again, they haven't released any details. I don't have any more than basically what I've said about this vulnerability. So right now, your only option is to really just drink.
Okay. On that note,
moving on to the next story. Where do you want to go from here? Let's go to critical vulnerabilities that can be exploited to hack Cisco small business routers. It may sound like I'm repeating myself from last week, but I'm not, because last week,
new one, isn't it?
Last week revolved around, and it's interesting as Tyler Robinson and I were just talking about these vulnerabilities in our home networking and security projects we're working on. And last week, it required that me as an administrator, I was logged into one of these switches via the web interface and authenticated. Someone could basically guess the session key and take over my session. And I was like, oh, that still hinges on that I'm logged in at the time. This new round of vulnerabilities that happened this week is basically a much better or worse attack, depending on your perspective. CVE 2020-3323 affects small business routers, and they list the thing. Basically, remote code execution with root privileges by sending a specially crafted HTTP request. Exploitation does not require authentication. Got to patch those switches. Much better vulnerability, in my opinion. And I like these Cisco small business switches for a lot of reasons. One, they are priced much less than the enterprise gear. Now, they also have a much more limited feature set, right? I've worked with the enterprise gear, I've worked with the small business gear, a more limited feature set. But the feature set for the small business stuff is really tuned toward, like, I don't need all of those extra features I might need in the enterprise. I thought Cisco did a great job of lowering the price, giving us high quality gear at a lower price point with a limited feature set, but the feature set is pretty good. It supports VLANs, it has support for security protocols such as SSH, right? Like you can get command line access, you can get web console access. But as we're learning over the past couple of weeks, there's a lot of vulnerabilities in the small business gear. I'm not sure what that stems from, whether it's internal, external, reported, or both. But this vulnerability is a lot more severe. My concern is that small businesses are not going to pay as much attention to these vulnerabilities and fix it, which means if I gain a foothold internally, if I can undermine the switching fabric, I can basically own the entire network. Kind of interesting. Where do you want to go from here? You want to go to Zoom? John, are you muted? Are you there? John, let's go to John, you love Zoom.
Hey. Yeah, let's hear about Zoom.
Yeah, let's bring Zoom up again.
Well, this is kind of filed in the why didn't I think of that bucket? And basically the article says, if you got a Zoom link, like zoom.us/your meeting room, right? The attacker can basically change that to, I'll pick on Cisco since we covered them in a previous story, right? Like cisco.zoom.us/ the meeting number. It still goes to my meeting room, but it attributes it to Zoom. So it ignores I forget what they call this feature, the vanity URL. The vanity URL. It will ignore the vanity URL and basically go to my Zoom room and allows for social engineering attacks, which is just why didn't I think of that style attack? It means I can impersonate and say, hey, I'm from Cisco. You should come to my Zoom meeting. And it's not from Cisco. It's my personal meeting, but it looks like it's from Cisco because I can basically impersonate Cisco's vanity URL. That's a pretty ingenious, very much a hacker style attack, right?
I wonder if it'll work with the zoom.gov domain.
I would imagine
Zoom.com, excuse me.
I would imagine that it would, right? Because it kind of makes the presumption that I'm ignoring the vanity URL. The vanity URL is really just there for, vanity, right? And it's just going to my room, right?
Oh, boy.
And one has to assume that I could put a password on my room, too, or not. I mean, would users really care, right?
Yes.
Hey, join my Zoom room and enjoy 50% off all Cisco gear, right? That would be.
But if we had Zoom back in the day,
the social engineering implications
would be the perfect place to go and find your Windows ME or 2000 server keys,
right? I mean, the social engineering implications of this are endless.
Oh yeah, totally make things look legit that aren't. That's sweet.
Lee, did you have other stories you wanted to cover before I get on more soapboxes?
I'm looking because we've had a lot of fun with these last few. There was another highly critical bug in SAP, but I don't call
Yeah,
it
I want to talk about that because you guys interviewed someone from Onapsis who was in my mind, authority on all things SAP vulnerabilities and exploits.
So yeah, we did, and it ties the two shows together.
Brian Tremblay.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He was really jazzed that they found that, and what Onapsis is doing to secure SAP, is pretty much unseen in the market space. Jeff, you want to chime in here on this one?
Nope, you're doing fine.
Oh my! I totally just got.
But just to say, I mean, SAP. I don't see it very often in my world. I used to see it 20 years ago, but it's more of a, what was he had an acronym for SAP, Enterprise something or other. Anybody remember? 3/4 of the Security and Compliance Weekly hosts are on the show right now.
No, we don't remember.
That was like,
but hours ago. The important piece is that a lot of businesses run their systems off of SAP. There are a lot of integrations that throw data into SAP, right? So if SAP isn't doing their best to try to secure what's going on, who's really going to do it?
Noah Bodie.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, it's cool that somebody found and is working to, disclose and fix it, but SAP is a pretty big install base. That's a pretty damn big target for vulnerability.
And highly customized per installation.
Yeah.
We've been talking with Onapsis and doing interviews and sponsored interviews with them for some time, right? And the thing that scares me is the just lack of visibility, right? And it continually gets better over time, but that lack of visibility from security teams, CISOs, even CEOs, right? Like the SAP team, great, makes software that makes our business run, but it's just mind-boggling how they've flown under the radar from a lot of the security processes and techniques that we've grown to understand when we talk about Windows and Linux and DevOps and web apps, and SAP has kind of flown under the radar. Very interesting.
Yeah. They're just kind of cooking along. Nobody's paying attention until a couple of days ago.
It's interesting. We did an interview on Enterprise Security Weekly, and we talked about there's a programming language, I don't remember the name of it now, in SAP that I had never heard of it. And I'm a nerd. I'd love to, learn about different programming languages. I'm like, it's ABAP, ABAP, I believe. ABAP, right? Is a programming language. It's very much like a query language for SAP systems. And there's millions of lines of code out there. And it's not on people's radar to go, what are the security vulnerabilities in that? Who's analyzing this software? Who's looking for vulnerabilities in the software? Who's doing static analysis? Turns out Onapsis is, right? But getting that on security team's radar is a challenge.
Right. ABAP is Advanced Business Application Programming.
Yeah, it's very much like a SQL.
If you are viewing the Discord, you're seeing the link to the untrustedly trusted Wikipedia article about ABAP.
Right. It's very much like a SQL or stored procedure kind of language. Yeah. I wanted to transition to Docker. I read this article, and the headline was Docker attackers devise a clever technique to avoid detection. And I was like, this is not a new technique, nor is it really all that clever, and nor should it ever really avoid detection. And for so many reasons, this article is just misleading. The article says normally attacks against misconfigured Docker APIs are initiated by pulling an image from a public repository, like Docker Hub, spinning up the container in the targeted host environment. But by building an original image on the host, scanners likely won't detect the problem since the image is built upon a standard Alpine-based image and would most probably be marked as benign. I don't even know where to begin with this article, right? Like, first, you should have tools in place that, one, look for exposed Docker APIs and lock that stuff down. And this is literally a firewall rule, right, that just protects the access to the Docker API. Like, number two is you can put authentication on your Docker API to use certificates to do that authentication. And I know this attack is not new because we were a victim of this attack when, in an emergency, we lost a local server on-premise, had to push up into the cloud, didn't secure the Docker API. Someone used that to upload a container and launched a distributed denial of service attack. That was years ago. And we talked about it extensively, disclosed everything we learned about the attack with our audience, right? And it shouldn't really matter what image is being executed on your Docker instances, right? You should scan all the images. In fact, you should know which images are yours, which images come from Docker Hub. If it's something that's not, it's not yours, it's not from Docker Hub, that should be a red flag. There's tons of tools available to be able to identify that. And you should mark that as malicious and eradicate it. This is just not a new problem, and I hate to see it being touted as a new problem. This was an article from SE Magazine. This, again, basically comes down to, at the very basics, a firewall rule. Again, very basic authentication on your exposed services. And three, like detection of code that's being executed. Is it yours or is it someone else's? So I just, again, not a great article.
I absolutely love being able to scroll through Facebook and saying, I'm not going to read that. It's clickbait. I'm not going to read that. It's clickbait. Oh, look, these people read that. It's still clickbait, but I'm going to go and read the synopsis of their clickbait. Like, come on, man. Press has to get better at being able to really put this stuff out there correctly. Don't just do it to grab a headline, Yeah,
that's what it felt like, Scott. They were just doing it to grab a headline. And I think we all go through a lot of steps and process to make sure that what we're covering is, if it's new, stating that it's new. If it's not new, explaining why and the history behind it, right? And this is an attack vector that certainly is not new. And if you're deploying
if you're gonna
Docker,
me, at least give me something in return, like a really good Rickroll or something, Don't just sit there and waste my time. 20 things, 20 vulnerabilities that every company needs to worry about. I mean, come on, man, you're killing me here.
And if you're gonna Rickroll it, might as well be me and Josh Marpet dancing on a pole.
Oh, dude, Rickroll on a pole is a thing, and if you're wondering what that is, I'm sure that it's about to pop up in Discord. One of the benefits of being on Discord. I don't know
if that's a reason to join our Discord or not.
Hey, anytime anybody can actually do a deep fake out of that, I will give them $100 out of my own pocket. If they can take that and deep fake it, man.
So let's shift gears and talk about one story that I posted.
Please, Jeff.
Enigma code breaking machine rebuilt at Cambridge. It was late. I only put it up at the beginning of the show, so you probably haven't seen it.
I'm refreshing.
But a fascinating article about how the Polish cryptographers back in the late 30s were actually the first to break the Enigma machine using special purposes device. If you read far enough into the article, it took them 9 months to break a message.
So wait, how does that compare to what Turing was doing?
Well, Turing was, the machine that he built enabled the breaking of the messages within before the keys were reset, which I think were done on a daily basis. That's what we would call the crypto period. So he was making it so it could be done in a matter of hours, greatly speeding up the process. But the understanding of, even though the Enigma was technically unbreakable because of the, hundreds of millions of possibilities of the settings, because of limitations in the system, because of dependencies in the system and the way it was being used, the Poles were actually the first to figure out how to break the thing, which I was not aware of that part of the history of it. So it's been fun for me to read the article. But they don't get a lot of credit for it, but they broke it first, apparently.
But one of the reasons why Turing was able to speed up the process was because of the known plain text in ciphertext, because every message began with Heil Hitler. Is that
with Heil Hitler? Yep, that was the known plain text.
Right.
And also, Enigmas were either 3 rotors or 4 rotors, and there was gazillions of combinations of what the settings would be. But once they were set, they would, let's say if there were 3 of them and that you used it once, the first wheel would advance once, and then you do another character and it would advance again, and I don't know how many characters it was, probably 26, but the first wheel would advance 26 times while the second one didn't budge, the third one didn't budge. But once the first one had completed a complete revolution, then the second one would increment by 1. That also was a dependency that they figured out that they could capitalize on.
Beginnings of basically computer science at that point. What you're describing, right?
Much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. Anyway, the little crypto history corner minute.
Love it. I read an article from NSS Labs where they tested web browser security, or insecurity, as it were, right? And it was interesting. Earlier today, I visited this article, and I was able to download the PDF directly without providing any information to them. Later, when I visited the site, I don't know if that was, I wasn't presented with the PDF. In any case, when I started going through the report that I downloaded earlier today, it was the report that was very focused on the browser's ability to detect malware. In Microsoft Edge, they said that Microsoft Edge uses the Microsoft mechanism for detecting malware that's tied to the malicious software removal tool, or Microsoft's whatever they're calling it now. They changed names of whatever it is, right? And that Chrome and Firefox were based on like the Safe Browsing Initiative API. And then as you read through the report, what was astonishing to me is that my interpretation of the results is that Edge, Microsoft Edge, was the best at blocking malware, which was just astonishing to me. Now, I don't know if they did another aspect of the report on phishing and another aspect on just like security in general. I had to say my kind of cursory analysis of the results, NSS Labs has done a great job at looking at browser security. They've released their methodology. It was not sponsored by, or influenced by anyone, for as far as I could tell, and did a great job of doing that. Again, astonished that Edge, which is kind of interesting because I posted a meme in the channel in Discord to start this show to be like, like, Edge, what is your role in life? And Edge responds, I'm just here to help you download Chrome, right? Like, it's very telling. If you use a Windows system, you fire up Edge for the first time to download Chrome, obviously, but it turns out, according to the NSS Labs report, that Edge is in fact better at detecting malware and preventing it. Kind of interesting. But now, what I find is interesting in latest Microsoft releases, I've noticed that the Microsoft Edge icon has changed. there's this whole alert like, hey, guess what? Your browser has been swapped out, and now Microsoft is using Chromium as its engine and has swapped out the whole browser to be Chrome. Does that mean it's less secure now? I still feel like people just download Chrome or Firefox and are ignoring Microsoft's browser entirely. Is that the case in enterprises today?
You know, somebody back at DEF CON a long time ago had said that Microsoft is going to become more secure than Linux and Mac. Remember that?
I don't. Refresh my memory.
Well, they unfortunately they were laughed out of the room, and nobody's ever really taken Microsoft seriously because of all the vulnerabilities. And we've been built as a tech society to not trust anything Microsoft puts out from as a web browser, right? Whether it was the internet, whether it was Internet Explorer versus Netscape, right? You remember that way back in the day?
Oh, I do.
Now it's Chromium versus Chrome, right? I mean, it's almost like somebody at Microsoft said, well, we want to try and steal some of the marketplace from Chrome, right? Even though it obliterates all of the RAM in your computer whenever you use it, right? It still looks good, it feels good, it acts good. Everybody's been brought up on it. It's institutionalized at this point. You had Firefox try to come in and say, well, I'm the leaner, meaner Chrome, right? And then you had Iceweasel come in and say, well, I'm the leaner, meaner Firefox. And which one do you want to use? At the end of the day, it all comes down to personal preference. If you want to use Internet Explorer, go ahead, live in the 1970s and use Internet Explorer, right? If you want to have that new hip, cool, Dr. Evil, I'm cool, I'm hip feel, right? Then you're going with Firefox or Chrome.
What the report does outline is don't use Opera, because that was by far the worst in terms of security. At least the malware report was really bad.
Opera's been a dumpster fire since it came out, and even to this day, it's still on a Mac. The same thing. Download Chrome.
Yeah, I mean that tend to be where people are at today. But you're right. I think the perception is that Internet Explorer has been a dumpster fire security-wise for a long time. I think IE6 solidified its place as a dumpster fire in terms of browser security. But where do we stand today? Now that Microsoft has kind of revitalized Edge using the Chrome kind of engine and hooked it into its own anti-malware kind of engine, which is pretty good, and basically turned around its image from being a very insecure software company to a very secure software company. Is it a viable option today? I'm not sure. This report shows that
no matter which way you go, you're always going to miss it with the browser wars.
You're always going to miss when you have that helmet on. I'm just saying.
Yeah, pretty much. You can't see anything out of this damn thing.
The only more inaccurate people are SAM people, is what I'm saying. Being a Star Wars nerd, I know you know what I'm talking about, right? Those blast marks are too accurate for SAM people.
Oh, I know. Oh, trust me, I know. it's man, and like the worst thing is like if you're in the 501st or you've ever built a sand person costume, you can't see anything less, right? I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. It's even more restrictive than a stormtrooper helmet.
I mean, can we just call it a plot hole? I mean, this could relate to like the whole browser war, right? Like, can we just call it like it is? Like, it's just a plot hole? Because like, if you watch the Phantom Menace, right, you see the sand people, right? They're on top of the mountains, right? When they're having the pod race, and they're plucking off the pod racers as they're going by with impeccable accuracy. Yet in A New Hope, Obi-Wan's like, these blast marks are too accurate for sand people. This must be Imperial Stormtroopers. Yet Imperial Stormtroopers miss everything in every single Star Wars movie. Like, none of it makes sense to me, Scott. Help me make sense
you wanna go
of
off
the
the
browser
deep end?
wars and the whole Star Wars accuracy thing with Sand People versus Stormtroopers.
You want to go off the deep end? How about the belief that Jar Jar Binks is actually a Sith Lord?
Oh.
Now we can go off the deep end.
Oh my
Let's
God.
get back into the stories, Paul.
No, I think you just said it was time to end for the evening.
I think so.
when you went
When we
there.
start talking about stuff like that, Jeff, it is time to conclude the show. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching.
It's time to dream about filling my coffers with cigars.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. Over and out.